In this lesson, we'll learn how to use image trace to clean up a couple different types of hand-drawn sketches. All right, great. So in the last lesson, we took a look at how we could come in and begin to turn a photo into a painting. Now, another really great use for image trace is to take something that you've drawn by hand, whether it be on a piece of paper or whether it be inside of an application like Photoshop, and create vectors from that pixel-based image. Again, whether it be a scanned-in image or whether it be something you drew in Photoshop. So what I've got here, let's go ahead and take a look at these images, one on the middle here and one on the left. And we'll come in and look at the one in the middle first. So this is an image that I drew inside of Photoshop for our painting skateboard graphics course in Illustrator. So if we were to come in and zoom in even further and just really look at this sketch, you'll notice that it's very, very dirty, very quick, very loose, lots of extra strokes of the brush here, creating really a lot of different, almost pencil-like strokes. So the other image we have here is something that's quite a bit more clean. This is again something that I've done in Photoshop, but the line work here is much more precise, much more refined. So looking here, you see very little of those just little scribbly type of lines. So now I'm showing you two just highly different types of sketches here because I want to show you ways that we can go about approaching each one of these as far as converting it into vectors. So let's go ahead and take a look at our zombie here. If we go ahead and select him. Now, thinking about our desired outcome, if we wanted to simply recreate this pencil-like look, then we would probably want to go with something like grayscale as a preset to start with. Now, this on the right is the outcome from that course where I actually went in and used the blob brush and actually painted on top of the sketch to create sort of an inked look. Let me go ahead and show you what we can do with image trace to get this sort of a look on this image. And we won't be able to obviously get as precise and as clean as this over here because that was all painted by hand. But if we come over and select our zombie here in the middle, let's go ahead and choose a preset here. I'm going to go ahead and start with our black and white preset. Just go ahead and click that one right there. Now this image is quite large, so you may receive this error message coming up saying that tracing may proceed slowly with this large of an image. And Illustrator prompts you to go into the Object Rasterize dialog to actually reduce the resolution of it. But I'm not too concerned since it's only a black and white image. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And you can see Illustrator returns a pretty quick result, but we don't have a whole lot of information showing up. Now again, this is something that's going to vary from pencil drawing to pencil drawing because different people draw with different intensities or values for their pencils. I prefer to draw fairly lightly with a low opacity brush in Photoshop, and you can see that by the lighter values, that many of which aren't being picked up here. So you almost completely lose his shoulder and arm, and really we're only getting some of the darkest values. So now the way we overcome this by starting with this black and white preset is with our threshold slider. Remember, this is how the image trace function is actually reading what black is and what white is. So if we want more black to show up, then we need to drag this slider to the right here. Just go ahead and drag it to the right and let Illustrator recalculate, and you can start to see a lot more of those details are beginning to show up. So we'll just go ahead and drag that a little bit more to the right, and since Illustrator's calculating this so quickly, you can see that now we're really starting to get a lot of that detail coming in there. Now, if I really wanted to increase the amount of black that's showing up, we could just really dial that up all the way here, and you can see what that does with that cranked up to 255. So let's not go quite that far. We'll come down to, we'll just say roughly 250 or so, and you can see how much black we can actually start to pull inside this inked result. Now obviously the two very, very different results. One here on the right from the course where I hand painted and admittedly took quite some time. Or we've got this one over here on the left where while it is very, very dirty and really almost over inked, it was done with just the click of a button. Now, we learned about some advanced options in the previous lesson over here in paths, corners, and noise that we might be able to use to sort of basically kind of refine this a little bit or increase the amount of detail. We learned about the corner slider and how that's going to allow Illustrator to create more corner anchor points. And we've learned about the path slider, where that's going to allow Illustrator to sort of tighten the shapes down that are being drawn as far as their the relationship to the actual pixel-based shapes. Now, I'm going to dial this down a little bit more. I think maybe come down to around 235 or so. And you'll start to see that we're starting to get some really nice details. Now, because of the nature of this image trace and this particular sketch, it has kind of that grungy, dirty feel. Now, if we wanted to start to pick up on a little bit more of that noise of the really soft pencil sketches that were really secondary to the primary lines, then we could again dial that noise down, just like so. Now, one thing we haven't spoken about yet in this course is the method of creating these shapes. There's two different methods, and they're right down here. As a matter of fact, if you mouse over the one on the left that is selected, you'll see that we're creating abutting shapes. Now, if I come over here and turn on my outlines with my tracing result, let's start to take a look at some of these shapes. So basically, where shapes are created, a knockout is created. So if a shape was created for this white area right here, and a shape was created for this black area right here, what happens is the shapes don't overlap. They end where they're bordering on each other right here. Whereas if we choose this next option for overlapping, it's going to allow Illustrator to begin to overlap some of the shapes. Now, this may come into play if you are creating an image trace for printing purposes and you are using overprinting and things of that nature. So if you were to overprint some of these shapes, then you would start to see some of that overlap showing up inside your artwork. Typically, when I'm doing this, I'll just leave the method set to abutting. It seems to work pretty well unless I have a specific look in mind that I'm going for. Now, with that said, let me come over here back to our tracing result, and let's just zoom out here. Now, notice here right below that, what we are creating is filled shapes. These are closed paths with a fill attribute applied to them that are being generated by the image trace dialog here. Now, we do have the option to create strokes, but this particular piece of artwork isn't one where I would probably choose to do that. Let's go ahead and take a look at this one over here. So again, this one is a very, very clean, very precise drawing where a lot of that extra pencil work has been really eliminated by redrawing this. So these are some really fine, what I would refer to as maybe inked lines. Now, they may be really refined and inked, but they are still raster. We can still zoom in and begin to see the pixels along the edges of these lines. So now to create this in vector terms, we could always come in and use the exact same method as before. We could come in here and start with maybe black and white, let Illustrator go through its process, and begin to ramp up the threshold. And again, this will do really well, and it'll create filled shapes for us. But what if we wanted paths, or stroked paths, to be more specific as a result of this, this image trace? We can actually do that right down here by selecting this option. Or we can start off by selecting the outlines preset here. So let me go and select that, and you'll notice that this looks a little bit odd because of the stroke that's applied to them, but let me go ahead and adjust the threshold here. We'll just go ahead and dial that up some till we get all of the lines accounted for. Just kind of zoom out a bit. Just slowly sort of ramping that up. So that looks pretty good. We've got most of the information accounted for. Let's go ahead and look at the tracing result with outlines at this point. So this may not look much different for you, but what we're looking at now are paths, not necessarily shapes. So at this point, if we were to come in and expand this, keep in mind that when you expand it, it breaks the link to the linked file, and essentially this artwork is embedded. So let's go ahead and expand that and ungroup that here by hitting Control-Shift-G. If we were to do that and maybe grab some of these pieces, you'll see that, again, what we're dealing with are stroked paths. So we could always come in here and select them all if we don't like the width of that stroke, and adjust that right over here in our stroke panel. So you can see that there were 2 points by default. If I bump that down to 1 point, we have most of that nice detail included here. Now, looks like we missed a path here for her hand, and it looks like there's some kind of confusion going on down here with the laces in her boots, but for the most part, that was a pretty quick and easy tracing of this inked line work. So in this lesson, we've learned a couple of different techniques for taking a hand-drawn sketch into Illustrator and converting it into vectors using image trace. All right, great. So at this point, let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson, where we're going to take a look at a logo and look at how maybe we can take a logo that's been rasterized or converted into pixels and convert it back into vectors.